Hello, I'm Megan Mance with the Homeland Security and Defense Forum, and we're very excited to kick off our symposium, 5G and Beyond, NextGen Infrastructure for Government. We're delighted to bring you today an exciting fireside chat on Department of Defense efforts around 5G and NextG. And I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers. First, we have Ms. Amanda Toman, who serves as Acting Principal Director for 5G in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. She is responsible for coordinating 5G efforts across the Department of Defense and oversees and directs the 5G to NextG research and development portfolio. And she brings to this role over 18 years of experience in DoD research and development. And she previously supported R&D efforts focused on innovative technologies to counter terrorism. And joining Ms. Toman is Mr. Travis Russell. He is head of the cybersecurity office at Oracle Communications, and his long career in telecom has centered on cybersecurity and fraud. And he served on several advisory councils, including the NSTAC. And moderating our discussion for us today is Dr. Dan Gerstein. He is a senior researcher at RAND Corporation and has authored several books on technology and national security. Dr. Gerstein served in a number of leadership roles with the Army and Department of Homeland Security, and we are delighted to have Dr. Gerstein serve on our HSDF Senior Advisory Committee. So Dan, with that, I am happy to turn it over to you.
Well, great. Thanks very much, Megan, for that introduction. I'm really looking forward to this event as well, because I think we've got a great set of panelists here, and we'll have an opportunity to really get into the 5G issues. Megan asked me to just do a quick introduction. I'll call it some perspectives on the 5G, and then we'll go right into discussions with our panelists. So when I think about the 5G, what I'd like to share with you is that I go back to my roots, and my roots are in the Army. I was an Army Signal Corps officer. And I think about my early days in Germany of providing command control communications. And in that, we had large fixed command posts. They were all analog and lots of people running around and a very dense environment. And, you juxtapose that against today and you see the opportunities that we've had with digital battle command on the move, for example. But that was really only at the command level. And I think that's really important, because what we're seeing today with respect to 5G is nothing short of a transformation of how we will have command control communications. And that's really what we want to talk about. We've never had the ability to get our communications really down to the individual soldier with assured high bandwidth communications. And so what does 5G offer at this end of the spectrum? Well, it offers computing at the edge, that high speed, assured connectivity, low latency in the hands of the warfighter. And it's all fueled by Internet of Things and the cloud. And when I look at the individual soldier and I think about 5G, it isn't just for that person there, but it's also the support structure. It'll be about battle networks and information that'll be going and coming from intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. The idea of linking sensors and shooters in real time. It's about AI-enabled logistics that'll stream the logistics of the future to that battle space. It's also about things like defense against hypersonics. And so there are a lot of reasons why 5G is very important. So, when I think about 5G and where we are today, I would say, we are still in the early stages. Lots of proofs of concept, lots of putting ideas together. And forums like this, where we bring together industry and government, I think are really essential to making sure that we understand the future and take advantage of the opportunities while mitigating the challenges. So, I'm also, I'll just say up front, I'm very heartened to see the discussion the actual establishment of the DoD 5G and Future G cross-functional team. I think that's, really needed, and we're going to bore into that as we have our discussion. And that's kind of where I'd like to start the discussion today. So with that introduction, again, welcome Amanda and welcome Travis. I'd like to ask Travis, given his technical background, to spend a few moments talking a little bit about what's different between telecommunications and 5G and even 4G and 5G. Help us understand why this is so critical.
Sure, thanks, Dan. So I think, one of the biggest differences that we're seeing here in 5G and the overall architecture and the technology that's used in 5G, we've been slowly evolving these networks to all software networks. And it began with the inclusion of TCP/IP protocols within the wireless world, which, 10 years ago, that was a big no-no in telecom. But today it's wholly embraced. And we're seeing that all of that technology now has made its way into 5G. One important thing to understand, though, is 5G is not about the RAN. We typically associate immediately spectrum to the NextG, and that's simply not the case. And in fact, the RAN does not deliver 5G services. The RAN provides you access to a larger network, and that larger network, what we affectionately refer to as the core, that is what delivers the 5G capabilities. It does leverage some of the 4G capabilities, and that was done on purpose. That the idea was operators needed to be able to continue to capitalize on their 4G investments. And so you're going to see a lot of deployments that are not purely 5G. In fact, every deployment that I've worked on, it's a hybrid. It's both 4G in some areas, and then it's 5G in other areas. That coexistence is important to the operators. So it's not about the RAN, and everything in the architecture is based on cloud technology. In fact, there's little to no telco technology in 5G anymore. There's a couple of areas where there's some outliers only because the standards haven't caught up enough to replace those yet, but they are going to be eventually replaced. So, 5G, it doesn't care about how you access. It doesn't have to be cellular. In fact, we're seeing cases where people are using Wi-Fi to access a 5G core network. Satellite is also on the docket here for the next release. The last piece to be virtualized, by the way, in the wireless network is the RAN. I mean, we've been using appliances for that access for decades. And that was sort of the last piece of the network that had not been converted to software. And so that's why you see a lot of movement around Open RAN and those technologies, because that's the last piece to actually get virtualized. And then you have a completely cloud-based wireless network. Yeah, the last point I'll make too, by the way, and I think you touched on this, forget your smartphones in 5G. 5G was not developed for smartphones. 5G was developed specifically to answer some issues that we have with IoT, and we can talk a little bit about what those are as well.
Great. So Amanda, with all that capability that's coming down the pipe, what are you going to do with it? How is it going to help the warfighter and more broadly, the Department of Defense?
Yeah, thank you. So the DoD recognized the need to invest in 5G in about 2019 when the 5G initiative was stood up. So the objective was to try and inject some money to build out these unique test beds where the department could display applicable use cases and really demonstrate the value to the department. Understanding that our fairly significant investment in 5G really pales in comparison to what industry is doing. Industry is spending billions of dollars in 5G R&D. So the hope is that we can leverage that commercial capability and show the department how we can really use commercial capabilities, potentially tweak it if need be for the department. So I think 5G really offers a unique opportunity in terms of the ultra high bandwidth, the low latency, and really the applications that we're looking at with these different bases. So, we're looking at things like AR, VR for the training environment, potentially for telemedicine as well. for things like your operators on the field to provide medical care, on the battlefield with sort of the expert talking in their ear, walking them through that situation. The edge computing to be able to tie the sensors that the soldiers might bring into the fight and provide that picture together and really stitch that information, do that processing on site so we don't have to send that back and get that processing, really enabling enhanced survivability and capability on the battlefield. So we have 4 sites that we started with, and those 4 sites are marching along, standing up their 5G test beds, and really right now starting to tie in the applications that we're working on to demonstrate that value of 5G. We're also looking at things like smart warehousing, albeit not the most exciting application of 5G, but I think the potential that it will provide to really provide efficiencies to the department are huge, not just for warehousing, but really for that logistical tail that goes with the soldiers into the fight. So, I'm really excited to be able to push forward this initiative and really work with industry to try and deliver capability to the department.
Great. So Travis, let me come back to you and talk a little bit about some of the early decisions that were made on 5G nationally. And I'd like to get your sense in particular of how some of the questions around spectrum may have either disadvantaged or caused issues for the United States.
Sure. So when we started looking at the problems that we had to solve with 5G and what the requirements were going to be, the only way to achieve some of those requirements was through some different spectrum. So for example, I mentioned earlier that it's all about IoT, and Amanda mentioned video being one of those really important components here. And in order, though, for video to be, reliable, not full of jitter and static and all of those things, you need very, very low latency. The way that you get low latency is not having long distances of transmit. And you need to have the right frequency and bandwidth to be able to support that video. So that was one factor in choosing what spectrum was necessary. But also, when we have small sensors, for example, the warfighter being able to wear body sensors for geometrics, that requires a different part of spectrum for short distances. So what you end up with is there's a combination of bands within our spectrum that really are optimal for different use cases in 5G. So it's not one set of frequencies, it's a combination of all of those. Unfortunately, in the United States, a lot of the premium spectrum that we needed for the support distance and roaming is already being used within government. And so we come into this issue of how do we share that spectrum in the mid bands. I think we've got a path there now, and I think that's getting resolved. We relied on millimeter wave in our early deployments, which is great for the short distance, but it's horrible because trees and bushes can interfere with millimeter transmission. So it has its own set of unique capabilities and issues. And then there's a lot of work that's being done, on the low band as well, because it too, again, the lower the frequency, the further the distance, the higher the frequency, the more throughput that you get, but the shorter the distance. And so we're working globally, not just within the United States, on normalizing where these bands are going to fall and how they're going to get deployed in networks all over the world. And I think we're going to see this harmonization of spectrum is going to be really, really important as we go forward.
Okay, super. So Amanda, coming back to you, I've got this question about the cross-functional teams. And, in thinking about the cross-functional teams, it's great that these sorts of organizations exist, but why now? I mean, the department's been working on 5G for a handful of years, depending on how one measures it. What's different now, and why is the need so great?
Yeah, so the cross-functional team formally got established last October when we got that signed out. So the objective of this cross-functional team, which is a little bit different than some of the other DoD cross-functional teams, our main objective is to transition technology. So, I have a bit of an advantage with the CFT in that we're managing the 5G initiative, where we are developing technology and we are working with the services to try and transition those capabilities. So the CFT really, gives me the ability to work directly with the services, the combatant commands, to really link up the capabilities that are coming out of the initiative with the services and really across the services. So we're busy right now trying to catalog all of the 5G capabilities that we're working on, where they fall on the spectrum, and how they fit into use cases and operational deployment needs for the department. And, I think the CFT really provides an opportunity to develop something that's interoperable. So, my hope in getting this started is we keep the Navy from just building a Navy system and the Army from just building an Army system. Rather, we have a capability that's across the department that allows for potentially plug and play capabilities. So understanding that the Navy needs are different from the Army needs, but that base infrastructure really needs to be consistent across the services. And at the OSD level, providing some guidance and policy security structure. So, how should the department be implementing this and addressing things like security concerns as we move forward with the deployment? So, it is a Herculean task to try and adjust the acquisition process that's in place in the department. So, I think right now we're working on processes to try and accelerate that, to try and make sure that we can keep up with commercial industry and how industry evolves, and ingest those new capabilities more rapidly than I think we have been in the past. And I think, like Travis mentioned, virtualized RAN, O-RAN concepts hopefully will lend itself to that sort of rapid evolution and adjusting to accept new technologies as they evolve.
Sticking with Amanda for just a second, are there any lessons that you have learned over this period that the department's been thinking about and working in the 5G space? What have you sort of concluded in the early part of this?
Well, it was a big task to get off the ground initially, but we're up and running, and I think the biggest lessons learned have been getting spectrum approval, getting authorities to operate. So the things that commercial industry probably doesn't have to worry about really are big tasks for the department, and trying to find ways to streamline that and make that as efficient as possible. We're making use of CBRS at many of our locations, so that's been a huge help. And one area I think we will have great value and input, I hope, is what we're doing at Hill Air Force Base with dynamic spectrum sharing. So we're looking at it from a perspective of a high-powered airborne radar asset and how that interacts with the 5G spectrum, but developing concepts or capabilities to share and coexist in that spectrum, I think will obviously, hopefully apply to other things that are in that same spectrum band that really is optimal for 5G as we move forward.
Excellent. So, one of the things that you had mentioned in the last answer that you gave was about the DoD acquisition strategy. Can you say just a little bit more about what that strategy looks like? And that'll give me an opportunity to ask Travis after that what he thinks of the DoD acquisition strategy.
Well, so the acquisition strategy that we employed for this initiative was the use of other transaction authorities. And the hope was to have OTAs employed so that we were more efficient and a bit faster than some of the FAR-based contracting mechanisms that exist. It's never going to be as fast as we want it to be, but I think we've gotten there. And what I really want to be able to leverage with the OTA process is the ability to move forward with additional prototypes. So we're a huge success with a warehouse, or we're a huge success with the AR, VR for tactical training environments. How do we go ahead and replicate that? So leveraging those OTAs for those low rate of initial production, replicating the capabilities that we've hopefully or will hopefully demonstrate successfully. So, I don't think it's as perfect as we want it to be, but we are trying to make it as efficient as we possibly can.
And Travis, so what would be your thought on that? Do you like the idea of using OTAs? Do you have any thoughts about what would facilitate this interaction with industry?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly appreciate, the move to the OTAs. I can tell you the challenge that we have had as suppliers is the bureaucracy that that made its way over to that process, which has been interesting. But I agree, there needs to be a faster path for the private sector to be able to get involved. And I think you'll find that if you can get rid of that bureaucracy layer, you'll find a lot more innovation being made available to you. Right now, it's kind of onerous for us to get involved in some of these. The test beds that you mentioned, for example, had some pretty significant legal issues that prevents suppliers from participating for a lot of different reasons, especially major suppliers. So I think as we work through some of those issues, it'll be to the advantage of the DoD.
So do you have all the information that you need as an industry partner to the government, Travis?
Yeah, I think one piece that's missing, and we've looked at all of the test beds, by the way, been following those very closely, but those are all focused on the use case and how you're going to use 5G. What I've been trying to understand is, what is the Pentagon's vision for the 5G network itself? Build a private network, use public networks, combination of both, and how does spectrum play in all of those roles?
So I think it's going to be a combination of that. So, looking across the spectrum of understanding that these bases that we have across the country, they are deploying commercial 5G capabilities now, and they're moving forward as far as base operations to provide that commercial capability to the residents on those bases. So we are going to have to, as a department, understand that's going to happen, but try to push out guidance as far as, what they should be buying, what they should be concerned about as far as equipment that's potentially in place there, and just make sure we're providing secure capabilities. So I think that's a piece of it. The other piece is the private network. So that's what we're employing at those sites, at those bases. So how does that private network interact with that public network, and how do we ensure that hybridization between the two? Because that's really what needs to happen, and that's the concept we're moving out with for the CFT. So trying to tie that together so all of those pieces can interoperate and allow the department to really leverage commercial as we move forward.
So, in thinking about what both of you just talked about, you brought up some interesting questions on issues such as innovation and, how do we drive innovation? And is it the concept of, this is really for both of you, but is it the concept that the DoD should drive innovation within the DoD applications of 5G, or depend on commercial industry to drive the innovation? What's that back and forth that can be achieved?
Go ahead, man. I'll let you go.
Okay. Yeah. So I think I mentioned at the beginning is the DoD investment is not going to match what commercial industry is doing. So I think that we need to leverage that commercial investment in R&D and the technology innovations that are happening in industry. I think we need to really try and leverage that better. And where there need to be specific DoD potential add-ons or modifications or certain security specs that we need to add on. I think we need to focus on adjusting where need be, but really focusing on how we can leverage all the innovation that's coming out of industry, because it is happening so fast, and we really need to remain relevant and make apply those capabilities to the force.
Well, Travis, innovation is really about solving problems and generating ideas to solve those problems. And, nobody really has a better feel for, the operational problems than, an organization like the Department of Defense, at least in their space. So is there something in particular that would be helpful for sharing with, I guess, between DoD and industry? How would you, if you were in a perfect world, how would you recommend that be done?
We've got a lot of really great minds within the organization, but they don't understand defense. They don't understand the problems that defense is straddled with, especially with wireless communications. And so it is sometimes a struggle to get that information to those people that don't have that background. So I think a clearer understanding of the challenges. I think we all understand the use cases themselves, but what are the challenges in actually implementing that in a defense environment? And security. You mentioned security standards, and we do a lot of work within the standards community, especially around security standards that are out there that really we can help DoD understand those standards better and how they can help the DoD better secure those networks. But we first have to understand clearly what are the challenges that are out there for these types of use cases, and what are the unique deployment requirements?
Amanda, you talked earlier about the CFT and the composition of the CFT, and you gave the kind of list of the DoD organizations, but I'm just wondering, is there a place on the CFT, given how much the commercial industry will drive, is there a place on the CFT to actually include industry as a stakeholder on part of the working elements of the CFT?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think having engagements and really working with industry so they understand what our needs are. I mean, that's definitely something that we are trying to do. Maybe we can try and do it better, collaborating with folks like the National Spectrum Consortium, making efforts to call industry partners together to talk through things like ORAN and the like. But yeah, I definitely think having either vendors come in and have working sessions with the components of the CFT, that would be really valuable, and I think would help shape potentially policy and the use cases, and helping to define what we put out there in terms of technical capabilities that we're looking for, and really working hand in hand with industry. Ultimately, that's the goal, right?
As you're thinking about what you're learning and how other elements of government are operating, I'm wondering, is there a way for DoD to share what it has learned in terms of both working with industry, but also about the absorption of 5G into its networks? How will others be able to do that? I come from Department of Homeland Security, and we were always turning toward DoD to see what they were doing, what you are doing, so that we could learn and not have to relearn the lessons. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we are definitely engaging with our interagency partners. So, we're working with NTIA for the Open 5G Challenge. So, Commerce, FCC, we're engaging with DHS. We participated in a jamming event recently out at White Sands with them, help provide some equipment for that event. And we're working really across, and with other intelligence partners as well, trying to share, really what we're learning at the bases and how they could potentially leverage some of the the investments that we've made, provide them with the lessons that we've already learned to try and help better help them address their technology gaps.
So when 5G first started to become in the news and very relevant to United States in general, we heard a lot about security, and we heard a lot about the Chinese and securing networks, and what we had to worry about. And so this is really sort of two parts. The first is to Travis to say, how do we feel about security now? And then coming back to Amanda to say, are we comfortable with DoD networks being operated on all these mixed systems? So first, Travis, what are your thoughts on security?
Yeah, it's pretty scary, actually. There's a lot of tools and there's a lot of capabilities available with the tech that's being used for 5G. The problem is that we have a significant gap in cybersecurity expertise within the industry. And as a result, I think it's not the technology that's the security issue, it's the implementation of the technology and the absence of securing those networks as they should. Case in point, we just saw a network, it's been 2 months now, get completely erased from existence because they didn't put the right mechanisms in place to protect access into that network. And it wasn't high tech, it was a very low tech intrusion from a phishing email of all things. So that, I think, is the part that really keeps me awake at night, is making sure that the operators that are building these networks are implementing the right security controls in the right places. And what I am seeing is a huge absence of that happening. And it all gets down to, we just don't have the professionals in place and available to fill those gaps. So I think that's going to be our biggest issue.
Amanda, what are your thoughts on security? Piece of cake or lots to do?
We are obviously very much concerned about security and how we go about securing 5G for the department. So we have a portion of the portfolio that might not be out as much in the press as the experiment sites, but a portion of the portfolio is focused on security and how do we understand what the vulnerabilities are of those networks, and how do we go about mitigating those vulnerabilities, and how do we provide our forces the ability to go into a adversary environment and operate over commercial existing equipment and do so and ensure that they have secure communications and can operate freely with those capabilities. So I think a piece that's definitely a concern, and we are looking and investing in areas to address that. And I think the other piece is with the CFT and working with industry to understand the level of security that's inherent to those networks. What would the DoD potentially need to modify to get approval for operation? And having the cross-functional team look to identify security requirements and spell out what needs to be implemented and really defining that implementation plan, like Travis mentioned.
So I have one last question I'd just like to ask, and I know it's early. We're still talking about 5G and in the early stages of the research and development process, and we're working through all that. But as your CFT points out, Amanda, there is this NextG that we have to think about. And so if you can kind of look into your crystal ball, what does it look like? What should we be thinking about on NextG? And is there a way to position ourselves now to be better oriented for the time when we're talking NextG? Travis, let me start with you.
Yeah, sure. I always chuckle a little bit when people start mentioning 6G. There actually is no 6G in existence right now as far as the definition. So what we see today is what we get. As we go forward, we're adding to that existing architecture and platform. No one knows when the NextG is actually going to get released. I'll say it's really marketing now is making that decision. As we start working on this architecture, though, this is not going to go away. It's going to get better. And we continue to work in the standards release by release by release on improving on that architecture. We started in release 15 a couple of years back, and that was the first release of 5G. We're now working on release 17. There's the definitions going on for what release 18 will look like. So it's about every 2 to 3 years, we have a new release that just continues to add improvements onto the existing architecture. And so that's really going to be important. What's, I think, critical for network operators, whether that be a telco or a private network, anybody that builds these 5G networks, you have to get your arms around cloud technology, how to build and secure a data center, how to build and secure a cloud environment. It's completely different than an appliance-based network as we've been used to in previous generations. And I think that's probably the most critical piece to understanding how we go forward. We need to have a very solid foundation on that architecture and on that cloud environment before we can move forward.
Amanda, what are your thoughts on NextG?
So I suppose a little bit pie in the sky. What comes to mind initially is dynamic spectrum sharing or spectrum harmonization. And that would really be a wish for any DoD operator. Oftentimes troops are deployed to locations and getting frequency approval to operate and turn on their equipment is not always easy. So, if things were had the agility to move about spectrum and figure out where they could operate, that would be really an amazing capability that the department would welcome with open arms. So I think we still have a long way to go, but that would be a wish. I think things like ORAN and implementing ORAN and the security of ORAN are definitely areas where we are looking to invest. And we are trying to posture ourselves with NextG investments so that we are not as far behind as we really started out with for 5G. So yeah, I think dynamic spectrum sharing, I think ORAN. I also think things like V2X or the capability for handset to handset communications, really developing that for DoD applications would play huge dividends, as well as non-terrestrial networks. How could we leverage satellite communications and incorporate that capability into the battlefield? Since I think that is coming out in release 18 of 3GPP, and how can we really leverage that capability?
Well, this has been terrific. Amanda, Travis, thanks so much for your time. Unfortunately, we have more questions than we do time available. And so maybe we can follow up on some of those. But thanks again for your candor and your insights and sharing your technical and operational insights. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.